$347,000. That's the number. I know it exactly because I'm a claims investigator. And when I finally sat down and ran my own life like a case file, that's what 28 years of being the family backup plan cost me. $347,000, exposed nerves, and a jaw that clenched every time I pulled into my mother's driveway. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand what I built before you can understand what they tried to take. I was 23 when I got hired at the insurance company in Houston. Entry level. Fraud department. I remember my first desk, the wobble in the left front leg, how I shimmed it with a folded insurance brochure and thought that was the cleverest fix in the world. Within 2 years, I'd caught a staged auto collision ring operating out of Pasadena that saved the company $1.4 million. They gave me a plaque. I hung it in my cubicle and felt like I'd proven something nobody in my family expected me to prove. See, when I was 16, my mother pulled me aside during Madison's homecoming dance prep and said, while curling Madison's hair and not mine, "Corinne, you were never going to be the pretty one, so you better make yourself useful." She said it like advice, like she was handing me a gift. And I took it. I made myself so useful that by 37, I was a senior claims investigator with a paid-off condo in Montrose and a body I was training to run 26.2 miles without stopping. My mornings started at 5:15. I'd lace up my Brooks and run along the bayou trails before the Houston humidity turned the air into soup. The streetlights along Allen Parkway would still be on, throwing orange circles on the pavement, and the city would feel like it belonged just to me. My breathing, my footsteps, my pace. No one calling, no one needing, no one asking me to write a check or co-sign a loan or drive across town with a casserole and a checkbook. Those miles were the only hours of the week that were entirely mine. On my kitchen counter sat my grandmother's recipe box. Wooden, hand-carved by my grandfather, the hinges oxidized to a soft green. Grandma Delacroix taught me every recipe in that box before she died. Shrimp étouffée, bread pudding with whiskey sauce, her cornbread that crumbled exactly right. Nobody else in the family learned. Madison said cooking was boring. Mother said she didn't have time. But every Sunday dinner, every holiday, every baptism and birthday, they expected me to show up with those dishes. And I did. I carried that recipe box like a sacrament. I thought it connected me to the family. I didn't realize yet that it was just another way I was being consumed. My mother remarried when I was 9. Madison came along when I was 11. From the moment she arrived, pink and screaming and perfect, the architecture of our family shifted. I was the useful one. Madison was the loved one. These weren't roles we chose. They were assigned to us like uniforms. And I wore mine for 28 years without ever once asking if it still fit. The pattern started small. 16 years old, Mother asking me to babysit Madison every Friday so she and my stepfather could go to dinner. No allowance. That was just what I did. 18, working part-time at a grocery store, handing over $200 a month for household expenses because you live here too, Corinne. 21, co-signing my mother's car loan because her credit was wrecked from the divorce. 23, paying the deposit on Madison's first apartment because she was just getting started. 25, covering Madison's emergency room bill, $1,400, because she didn't have insurance and was crying so hard on the phone, I could feel her tears through the receiver. 27, a new roof for Mother's house, $8,700. I paid it on a credit card and ate rice and beans for 4 months. 29, Madison's wedding. I paid for the flowers, the rehearsal dinner, and the photographer. $6,200. At the reception, Mother gave a toast thanking God for blessing Madison with Darren, a man who would take care of her the way she deserves. She didn't mention me. Not once. Each gift, each rescue, each silent transfer from my account to theirs came with the same unspoken contract. This is what useful looks like. This is how you earn your place. And every time the money left my hands, the silence that followed confirmed it. No thank you. No acknowledgement. Just the next request, already forming like weather on the horizon. Then Darren tweaked his back. That's how Mother announced it. Sunday dinner. The smell of my own étouffée, steaming from the pot I'd carried across town. Everyone seated at the table except me, because I was still serving. Mother cleared her throat the way she does when she's about to assign a task and said, Darren hurt his back something terrible and can't work. Madison's beside herself. Corinne, you'll need to cover their mortgage for a while. Just temporarily. You don't have dependents, so it's not like it'll hurt you. She said it the way you'd tell someone to pass the salt. No question mark. No please. Just the assumption that my money was communal property and my solitude was evidence of surplus rather than sacrifice. I looked around the table, Madison dabbing her eyes with a napkin, Darren with his hand pressed to his lower back in a performance so practiced I almost admired the technique. My stepfather studying his plate, and every pair of eyes eventually landing on me, waiting for the nod. I nodded. Their mortgage was $1,700 a month. I paid it for 5 months. $8,500. During that time, I offered to review Darren's disability claim. I do this for a living. I could have had his benefits expedited, the paperwork streamlined, the process cut in half. The moment I said it, my mother's face changed. Something flickered behind her eyes, quick as a pilot light catching, and she said, Family doesn't investigate family, Corinne. That's not your place. Her voice had an edge I'd never heard directed at his situation before. I filed that reaction away the way I file inconsistencies in a claim. I didn't know yet what it meant. But my hands went cold at the table, and I wrapped them around my coffee mug and held on. Then the utility bills started arriving. Madison began forwarding them to me, power and water and internet, with little notes attached. Just keeping you in the loop. Smiley face, as if making me their unpaid financial secretary was a favor, an inclusion. I organized them in a folder on my laptop without thinking, the way I organize case files, force of habit. And that habit, that reflexive documentation, would eventually save my life. Here's where the floor dropped out. I was at my desk at work running routine database checks on an unrelated fraud case. Standard procedure, cross-referencing business registrations with disability recipients to flag conflicts. And there it was. Darren Mitchell, Mitchell Landscape Solutions, LLC. Active, 3 years of bank deposits totaling $127,000, while simultaneously collecting federal disability payments for a back injury so severe he supposedly couldn't lift a bag of groceries. I sat at my desk and the fluorescent light above me buzzed the way it always did, but the sound was suddenly unbearable, a vibration in my teeth. I could feel my pulse in my wrists. I looked at the numbers. I looked at the dates. The deposits were steady, 15 to 20,000 a quarter. All while Darren sat at my mother's table pressing his hand to his back and letting me write checks for his mortgage. This wasn't laziness. This wasn't even greed. This was a system. I closed the database. I locked my screen. I went to the bathroom and stood at the sink and looked at my face and understood something I'd been refusing to understand for 28 years. They weren't careless. They were organized. The only person who didn't know the plan was me. I didn't confront anyone, not yet. Instead, I did what I do. I investigated. I pulled Darren's landscaping company Facebook page and found photo after photo of him hauling pavers, operating machinery, lifting wheelbarrows loaded with soil. 2 weeks before the nephew's baptism, a video of him carrying 40-pound flagstones across a client's yard, grinning, sleeves rolled up, Not a trace of pain in his posture. I screenshotted everything. I downloaded the video. I timestamped it. I cross-referenced the dates with his disability payment schedule. I built a case file the way I'd build any case file, except this one had my family's names on every page. And then I heard the voicemail. I'd left my phone at Mother's house after the last Sunday dinner. When I came back to retrieve it, the house was empty. But the answering machine on the kitchen counter, the old landline Mother refused to give up, had a blinking red light. I wouldn't have pressed it. I almost didn't. But something, the same instinct that makes me open one more file at work when the numbers don't add up, made me press play. My mother's voice, steady, instructional, coaching Madison on how to establish that I was emotionally dependent on the family. She used the phrase like she'd practiced it, like a lawyer had given it to her. If we can show she can't manage without us, we can petition. Her pension, the condo, all of it. She doesn't even read what she signs, Madison. She trusts us. And Madison's voice in the background, not protesting, not uncomfortable, just asking, should I call her this week or wait until after the holidays? The kitchen smelled like pine sol and old coffee. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the wall, the one I'd bought Mother for her birthday 3 years ago, ticked evenly. And I stood there holding my phone and listening to the two people I'd spent my entire adult life protecting discuss how to legally strip me of control over my own finances. My knees didn't buckle. My vision didn't blur. What happened was quieter than that. Something behind my sternum, something that had been holding all the weight, simply set it down. Not with a crash. With a click. Like a lock engaging. I drove home that night and sat on my balcony in Montrose and watched the Houston skyline and didn't cry. I was past crying. I was in the clean, cold space on the other side of it, where everything is very still and very clear. I picked up my grandmother's recipe box from the kitchen counter where I'd left it, ready for the next family dinner, and I put it in my bedroom closet on the top shelf. That box wasn't going to their table again. Miss Lorraine called me 2 days later. She was 78 years old, my grandmother's best friend, the woman who used to braid my hair on summer afternoons while Grandma Delacroix rolled out pie dough. She'd heard the church gossip, Madison telling the women's group that I was struggling with jealousy issues and had an unhealthy attachment to money. Miss Lorraine's voice on the phone was the first warm thing I'd felt in weeks. She said, "Baby, your grandmother told me before she died to watch out for you because she knew they'd bleed you dry. I should have called sooner. I am sorry. I am here now." I told her everything. The disability fraud. The voicemail. The power of attorney I'd found in Mother's desk drawer. Already drafted. Already prepared by a lawyer I'd never met. Dated 8 months before anyone first asked me for help with Darren's situation. 8 months. They'd been planning this before the back injury performance even started. The power of attorney would have given my mother legal control over my finances, my condo, my pension. All she needed was my signature, and they were building a narrative of emotional dependence to get it. Miss Lorraine was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "My job." If you've ever been in this place, where the people you love have turned your generosity into their business plan, stay with me. I need you to hear how this ends. Subscribe now so you don't miss it. I began the masquerade. I went to Sunday dinners. I brought the étouffée. I smiled. I nodded when Mother talked about Darren's pain and Madison's struggles. I wrote a smaller check each visit, testing whether anyone noticed the decline. Nobody did. They only noticed the check. I filed my incident reports on Darren's case, detailed, time-stamped, photographed, every piece of evidence organized in my personal cloud drive. One phone call to the Social Security Administration's fraud hotline and Darren's world would collapse. But I wasn't ready yet. The co-signed minivan loan had a deadline approaching, and Mother had called a family meeting to announce that I'd be signing. "Family helps family," she said, and 31 relatives looked at me like I was an ATM in a Sunday dress. I didn't sign. I said I needed to review the terms first. Mother's face tightened. Madison's eyes narrowed just slightly, the way they did when a plan wasn't going smoothly. Darren, seated in the recliner with his hand on his back, shifted his weight and looked at my mother with a question on his face. I saw the exchange. 2 seconds of silent communication between the three of them, a team checking signals. And I smiled and said I'd have an answer by Christmas. At church the following Sunday, I parked in the back lot and saw Darren's truck. The one with Mitchell Landscape Solutions on the door. He'd been sloppy about it, parking it right there where anyone could see. I photographed it. Registration, plates, the company logo, the equipment in the bed. As I was crouching by the tailgate, the church side door opened. Darren stepped out, garbage bag in hand, and I straightened up so fast I bit the inside of my cheek. He looked at me. I looked at him. "Just admiring the truck," I said. "You always did keep your vehicles clean." He smiled, proud, the way men smile when you compliment their equipment. "Gotta keep up appearances," he said. He had no idea how right he was. The weeks before Christmas moved like a held breath. I consulted with a lawyer, quietly, about my liability exposure. I confirmed that I could cancel the life insurance policies I'd been paying for the entire family without their consent, because I was the policyholder. I withdrew as guarantor on the family phone plan. I drafted letters. I organized my evidence into a presentation on my phone. Clean, chronological, undeniable. Miss Lorraine and I met for coffee at a cafe in the Heights. She stirred her cup and said, "Corinne, are you sure about Christmas Eve? In front of everyone?" Her hands trembled slightly around the mug. I understood her hesitation. She'd watched this family for decades. She knew the cost of standing against them. I said, "I need you there, not to speak unless you want to. Just to be there so I know one person in that room sees the truth." She looked at me across the table and her trembling stopped. She said, "I'll be there. Your grandmother would want me there." There were nights I almost stopped. Nights I lay in bed and remembered Madison at 4 years old, reaching for my hand in the grocery store. Remembered Mother braiding my hair before my 8th grade dance, the only time she did it without being asked. Remembered the family singing at the table and my voice being part of it. I wasn't burning those memories. I was just finally admitting they weren't the whole story. Love and exploitation can live in the same house. I know that now. The question isn't whether they loved me. The question is whether their love ever required them to treat me as a person instead of a provision. Christmas Eve. Mother's house. 31 relatives packed into rooms decorated with lights I'd bought 3 years earlier. The smell of the house hit me when I walked through the door. Pine sol, cinnamon candles, old carpet, and my jaw clenched so tight I felt it in my temples. I'd been telling myself that reaction was just stress. It wasn't. It was my body knowing the truth before my mind let it in. I didn't bring the recipe box. Dinner happened. Small talk happened. Darren sat at the head of the table because Mother always gave him the head of the table, the son she chose. He kept one hand near his lower back. The performance so automatic I doubt he even noticed himself doing it anymore. The kids ran through the house. The pastor arrived for dessert, the way he always did, and settled into the armchair with a plate of pecan pie. Then Mother stood. She smoothed her blouse. She clinked her glass. And she began her annual gratitude speech. She thanked God. She thanked the pastor. She thanked Darren for, and I will never forget the exact words, providing for Madison despite his terrible injury, showing us what real sacrifice looks like. Real sacrifice. I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor and every head turned. My mother's glass was still raised. The room went silent. That specific silence that lives between the moment a match is struck and the moment the flame catches. "I have something to show everyone," I said. My voice was even. My hands were steady. I'd rehearsed this the way I rehearse depositions, not for drama, but for precision. I held up my phone. On the screen was the video from Darren's landscaping company Facebook page. Darren, 2 weeks before this night, hauling 40-pound pavers across a client's yard. Smiling. Strong. Not a single grimace of pain. I turned the screen slowly so every person in that room could see. "This is Darren's business," I said. "Mitchell Landscape Solutions. Active for 3 years. $127,000 in deposits. During the same period, he's been collecting federal disability payments for a back injury that prevents him from working." The room didn't gasp. It did something worse. It went completely, fundamentally still. I could hear the Christmas lights buzzing on the tree. Darren's hand dropped from his back. First time in 3 years I'd seen him forget the gesture. His face cycled through expressions like a slot machine. Confusion, then recognition, then the pale drain of blood from skin that understood what was happening. Madison's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Mother said, "Corinne, this is not the time or place." "Then when is?" I asked. "When is the time? When is the place?" Because I've been waiting 28 years and nobody ever scheduled it. I held up the printed power of attorney document. "Can anyone explain why our mother had a lawyer prepare a document giving her legal control over my finances, my condo, and my pension? Drafted 8 months before Darren's injury, before anyone asked me for a single dollar of help?" I read it aloud. Every word. The room heard it. The pastor set down his pecan pie. My Uncle Roger, who'd never said much about anything, slowly removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "I have paid for this family's emergencies, their insurance, their peace of mind for 28 years, I said. "And last month at the grocery store, my mother had to ask Madison what my job title was." That was the sentence. That was the one that broke the room open. Because everyone there knew it was true. They'd watched it. They'd benefited from it. And not one of them had ever said a word. Madison tried first. "Corinne, you're making this about money when it's about family." Deflection. Textbook. "It's always been about money," I said. "You just never had to think about it because I was the one writing the checks." Darren stood up. "That business is nothing. Side work, cash jobs. It doesn't mean anything." Minimization. I'd seen it 1,000 times in depositions. $127,000 in 3 years is not a side job, Darren. That's a career you hid while collecting federal benefits. And I have every deposit documented. Mother's voice went high and thin. "This is Christmas Eve. You are ruining Christmas Eve for everyone." Guilt redirection, the most familiar weapon in her arsenal. "You were going to have me declared emotionally dependent so you could access my pension, Mother. I have the voicemail. Do you want me to play that too?" The color left her face. Complete. Like watching a screen power down. Madison looked at her mother, and for the first time, I saw something new in Madison's expression. Not guilt. Recognition. The realization that the system she'd benefited from had just been exposed in front of every person whose opinion she'd ever cultivated. Miss Lorraine, seated in the corner, closed her eyes and nodded. Slowly. Like she'd been waiting 30 years to see it. That nod carried more weight than any testimony could have. The pastor saw it. Uncle Roger saw it. The room recalibrated. I left. I didn't slam the door. I didn't deliver a closing statement. I walked out into the December night. The air cool and clean against my face. The kind of Houston winter that feels like a held breath releasing. and I drove home to Montrose with the windows down. What happened next? I heard about in pieces. Through Miss Lorraine, through cousin texts, through the silence that spread like water finding its level. I canceled the life insurance policies I'd been paying for the entire family. Everyone. Mother, Madison, Darren, the kids. The lapse notices arrived in January, and my mother called me 14 times in one day. I didn't answer. She left messages that evolved like a case study in manipulation. First, outrage. How dare you cancel our insurance without telling us? Then confusion. Corinne, I don't understand what's happening. Then bargaining. Let's just talk about this like adults. I'm sure we can work something out. Then, finally, a voice I'd never heard from her before, small and stripped of performance. Corinne, please. I stopped paying the family phone plan. 3 lines went dead. I withdrew from every financial arrangement silently, precisely, the way you remove load-bearing walls when you've already built a new foundation somewhere else. Darren received a federal fraud investigation letter in February. I don't know who made the call. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the system working the way it's supposed to. Either way, $127,000 of unreported income doesn't stay hidden once someone knows where to look. His disability payments were suspended. The investigation opened. Madison had to sell the new minivan, the one I was supposed to co-sign, to cover their initial legal fees. Mother's home insurance lapsed because she'd never realized I was the one paying the umbrella policy. She called the insurance company and they told her the policyholder had canceled. She didn't even know I was the policyholder. 28 years of premiums, and she thought coverage just happened, like weather. Madison stopped posting on social media. The church group that had heard about my jealousy issues started hearing other things. The truth filtering out through witnesses who'd been in that room on Christmas Eve, who'd seen the video, who'd heard the power of attorney read aloud. Nobody spread it maliciously. They just stopped pretending. 6 weeks after Christmas, I got a letter from Madison. Handwritten. It said she was sorry. It said she didn't know about the power of attorney. It said she wanted to have lunch. I read it at my kitchen table and felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not forgiveness. Just the clean absence of obligation. I put the letter in a drawer and didn't respond. New Year's morning, my Montrose condo. 5:15 and I'm awake, not from an alarm but from habit, from the body I've trained to meet the day. My running shoes sit by the door, broken in, ready. On the fridge, held by a magnet from a half marathon I ran in October, is the registration confirmation for the Houston Marathon. My name printed on it. My race, my miles, my lungs. I make French press coffee. The ritual of it, the boiling water, the bloom of grounds, the 4-minute steep, the slow press, fills the kitchen with a smell that belongs only to this moment, only to me. I carry the mug to my balcony, and the Houston skyline is doing what it does at dawn, turning gold from the bottom up. Glass towers catching light one floor at a time like someone is switching on the city piece by piece. My grandmother's recipe box is on the counter behind me. I brought it out of the closet last week. Not for a family dinner, for myself. I made her shrimp étouffée on a Tuesday night for no reason other than I wanted it. I ate it at my own table, in my own silence, and it tasted different. It tasted like something that was mine. Miss Lorraine came over the following Saturday. We cooked together. She told me stories about my grandmother I'd never heard, stories that had nothing to do with family obligation and everything to do with a woman who loved fiercely and left when loving cost her dignity. We ate bread pudding with whiskey sauce and didn't talk about my mother. The quiet between us was the warm kind, the kind that doesn't need filling. My shoulders dropped 3 inches the first Sunday I didn't drive to my mother's house, and I cried for an hour straight. Not from sadness, because relaxed felt foreign, because my body had been braced for 28 years and it didn't know what to do with the space. The absence of tension was its own kind of shock. I want to tell you something that matters. What happened to me has a name. Psychologists call it parentification, the invisible conscription of one family member, usually a child, into the role of financial and emotional provider. Studies show that 68% of adults who were financially parentified in childhood continue the pattern into adulthood, often without recognizing it until a crisis forces the reckoning. And here's the number that stopped me cold when I found it. Adults in financially exploitative family systems lose an average of 41% of their lifetime savings to family demands before they establish boundaries. 41%. I ran my own numbers. I was at 43. This isn't about being generous. Generosity is a choice made from abundance with full knowledge and freedom. What I experienced was extraction disguised as love, obligation framed as family, and exploitation maintained through the deliberate suppression of my identity into a single function: provider. The moment I stopped providing, I stopped existing in their world. And that absence told me everything I needed to know about what my presence had actually meant to them. If you've ever had your family treat your success as a resource they're entitled to while treating your boundaries as a character flaw, tell me your story in the comments. Because I know there are more of us than they want us to believe. We're not bitter. We're not selfish. We're just finally awake. My balcony is warm this morning. The coffee is good. The marathon is in 3 weeks, and my legs are ready. Somewhere across Houston, my mother is navigating an insurance market she never learned to understand. Madison is doing her own taxes for the first time. Darren is answering questions from federal investigators about $127,000 he thought nobody would ever count. And I'm here, watching the sunrise, holding a mug I bought with my own money, in a condo I paid off with my own hands, preparing to run a race I trained for in my own hours. None of it is spectacular. All of it is mine. Tell me where you're listening from right now. Drop your city in the comments. And tell me this: if you'd been sitting at that Christmas Eve table, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet one more year? Or would you have stood up? Like this video if any part of this story felt like your own. And subscribe, because I'm just getting started telling these stories. Not for revenge. For proof that walking away is not the same as giving up. Sometimes walking away is the first time you've ever walked toward yourself. The recipe box is open on my counter. Tomorrow, I think I'll make the cornbread. Just for me. Just because I want it. And that, after 28 years, is more than enough.